Hi, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining us for this latest Rootwurks webinar. What's it like to run a cannabis company in Missouri? My name is Ben Hartman. I'm the content manager here at Rootwurks, and I'll be your host for this webinar today. So in the first year of legal cannabis sales in Missouri, there was more than $1 billion in legal cannabis products sold, which is a great number, but cannabis businesses in that state still face a number of challenges just like they would in any other legal state. So to take a closer look at what the industry is like there in Missouri, we have a few different experts here today. So let's go ahead and introduce them. First up, we have Suzanne Morrison. She's the founder and owner of STL Cannabis Services, which provides internal audits, training, and education services for cannabis businesses. A passionate educator on cannabis, she's been part of the industry in Missouri since they legalized medical marijuana in 2020. Hi, Suzanne. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for being here. Next, we have Tammy P, a cannabis industry insider and connector, and the founder and owner of TPP Services, LLC, which provides support to the cannabis industry in the U.S. and Canada for sourcing of all things industry and marketing and operations related. Hi, Tammy.
Hi, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Finally, we have Dave Owens, the Director of Culinary for Proper Brands. Dave has more than 3 decades of culinary experience and is Director Culinary, overseeing all cannabis edibles manufacturing for Proper Brands, a fully vertical cannabis company in Missouri. Hi, Dave. Good afternoon.
How is everybody?
Doing great. So far, so good. Yeah. How are you all?
Wonderful.
Great.
Lovely. Well, I thought just for anybody who maybe isn't all that familiar, just to kind of take like a glance at what the first year of legal cannabis has been like. So I thought I'd ask you, Tammy, how would you describe, I guess, how they rolled out the market there?
No, we did a really nice job when we went medical. When it passed in 2018, it was right before COVID happened, and we had to deal with rolling out a brand new program while the pandemic was happening. But things went really well here, and the medical program rolled out, and we had way more people getting cards than anyone had predicted. Recreational has been a little bit bumpier, more than anything, because it was rolled out very quickly. The amendment passed in November, and then we went live just over a year ago on February 4th and 5th of 2023. And so we're still kind of in the midst of trying to figure out how to interpret new regulations. And we have our share of challenges, but much like in other markets, we see some of the same patterns that we see in other markets in the same point in their life cycle like we are. Price compression and competition. The number of brands that we have available for consumers in Missouri is unbelievable. And so there's a lot of choice right now, but we're also starting to see some price fluctuation. So that should level out here before too long.
Mm-hmm. And what about at Proper Cannabis, Dave? How have things been in this past year?
Well, they've been pretty exciting. Certainly it was a little slower go when we had just medical cannabis, but as soon as recreation happened, it was all hands on deck and full speed ahead. But it's leveled out a little bit since then. I mean, like you mentioned earlier, Ben, about the amount of sales have been incredible. We've done pretty well, but there's, as Tammy says, a lot of competition, particularly in the manufacturing space. There's a lot of licenses, and so it's a lot of brands, a lot of multi-state operators. So it's challenging, but we're navigating pretty well so far.
Mm-hmm. That's great. It's good to hear. And Suzanne, how would you, if you were to compare to some of the other states, or I guess, do you think that Missouri has kind of learned from, I guess, I wouldn't say the mistakes, but things, how other states have done things for better or for worse?
I would say to some degree, yes, there has been some research done by, the Missouri regulatory body to just get kind of that foundation of the industry with rolling out. But I do think there were still some opportunities that we missed. I feel like we tried to kind of reinvent the wheel in some aspects where we could have, gained more insight by looking into some of the other industries and the other states that have been successful for 10 years.
Right. So look at the ones that have been successful, and then I guess look at some markets that maybe where it's been a bit more mixed to find things to, I guess, to avoid or ways to do things
Sure.
differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I'd say
definitely.
Oklahoma is probably the market right now that we would like to not have similarities with.
And that's just because it's just too many businesses, too many licenses.
Yes, it's very, very open. It's very easy to obtain a license. You don't have to have the credentials and background that you've seen in the Missouri license process.
Makes sense. So Tammy, you mentioned when you were speaking about prices, would you consider is it kind of like a buyer's market or a customer's market at the moment? Or is it kind of tougher for businesses, or how would you describe it?
I think it's a struggle on both ends. As a consumer, we're always inherently going to look for the best deal we can find. And so that's been something that a lot of retailers have had to think about, in designing their pricing structure, in designing what their margin looks like. And, anyone who's been in the cannabis market that's been around for a while and that's, considered a mature market knows that the 100% markup or the 100% margin is a limited run. The people that are manufacturers, the people that are selling wholesale, their cost of goods doesn't typically change drastically. And so what we start seeing, and again, it mirrors a lot of other markets that are at this same point in their legality history, if you will. At some point, their margin has to shift because the people that are on the manufacturing or the wholesale side don't have the same ability to make their margin what it is. So for example, if you're selling a product wholesale to a retailer and they want to feature something on Thursdays, they want to do Thirsty Thursdays, and you're a beverage manufacturer, a lot of times they'll reach out and say, we want to do Thirsty Thursdays, will you do a split with us so that we can protect our margins? Well, that's not really feasible when our margin is very, very short. And what inevitably happens is that the retailers have to be willing to shift a little bit and understand that on some products they can have 150% markup to make their margin. But if they're going to offer promos and discounts, if we look at any other industry or consumer packaged goods, there are things that are loss leaders and there are things that you price because you know that you have a margin. So some of that is going on right now, and the competition right now is very thick. So if you were to pick, something that we would consider to be standard as far as a product, like a distillate vape cart, the number of those that are available from different brands across the spectrum is larger than it's ever been. So consumers have a lot more choice. And so that puts a lot of pressure on brands to find a way to differentiate themselves. And very often that winds up being price.
Mm-hmm. Is it a situation where cannabis companies in Missouri can really compete with the legacy market like they could maybe in other states as well because of the pricing, or is that maybe a little too early to say?
I think it depends on the consumer, and I would be interested to see how Dave and Suzanne answer that. But we have a lot of people that are used to paying $300 an ounce in the legacy market, whereas now they may be able to go to a dispensary and get an ounce for $120, $150, $200.
Yeah.
And there are arguments on both sides about whether or not it's comparing apples to apples.
Yeah. No, but definitely, people, like you were saying, they definitely go to, as consumers, the price is such a huge dominant thing, obviously. Was that what you would say, Suzanne, also, that it's like, as opposed to maybe some other states where the legal industry doesn't maybe provide the level of competition that it could to the not regulated market, that in Missouri it's maybe not the case?
I would, kind of follow along the same line as Tammy. A lot of the things we're seeing with price changes and supply for demand and that type of thing, is that the prices are still kind of sitting in Missouri, where legacy market, the black market, the gray market, they do offer a more competitive price still in a lot of areas for us. I think from a consumer standpoint, though, where Missouri is benefiting with that is we have a large group of consumers that want to know what they're consuming, and that's something those other markets don't offer.
Yeah. Yeah, you just don't get like a COA when you buy,
Correct.
Things like that, or you don't know. Yeah.
Or even the basic education about the product. I mean, a lot of the times in the legacy market, you don't even know what's in that gummy.
Right. Or you just sort of like, this is what we have and this is what I'm selling,
Take it or leave it.
Yeah, which, worked pretty well for a lot of people for decades until there was, better options out there.
Yes.
Speaking of options, Dave, what do you think, what are some of the products that are more popular with Proper brands that you see people in Missouri really love or kind of seek out?
Well, with us, particularly in the manufactured space, which is really where I'm focused on, gummies are still the place to be. I mean, there's a lot of competition in that space. We also produce chocolates and mints, and they're less so. There's less competition in that area, and we do pretty well there. But gummies is really, really dense. We do also manufacture concentrates, and those things like Tammy said, regular vape card, I'm sure is more of a commodity than some of the more esoteric things that we might produce with batters, diamonds, and live resonance, things like that. So we try to offer something for almost everybody, being vertically integrated, to help make sure we're penetrating the market.
Mm-hmm. And are there sort of like certain type of products that maybe down the road, as the market matures in Missouri, or there's more options that you can roll out as as customers want to try new things that they haven't had yet?
Yeah, I think so. And one of the big areas we're seeing a lot of traction is higher potency edibles, things that are 100 milligrams or 1,000 milligrams to a pack, things like that. And we have some high potency, but not that quite that high yet. But, given the popularity with the consumer, I can see us going in that direction.
That's a great example, Dave, because I think it's so funny that when we were medical only, kind of the standard was 10 milligram gummies in a bag of 10 for 100 milligram total package. And then after we went rack, we had some really big players come into the market with super high potency, like when Cosmic first got here, and they had 1,000 milligram package or even bigger. And there's such an interesting shift, especially in bud tender behavior, because I find that, and Suzanne and I have talked about this for days on end, a lot of us in the industry have, there's definitely a part of the market that is seeking out highest potency they can possibly get, whether it's gummies or flower. They're chasing THC. And that's something that can be really frustrating when you think about the other archetypes that are coming into retailers wanting products. If someone walks into a retailer and they're a boomer and they haven't had any experience with cannabis in 30, 40 years, walking into that dispensary can be really intimidating for them because they haven't necessarily ever had the opportunity. And so they're somewhat apprehensive, and usually they'll say something to the bud tender like, I haven't used cannabis in a really long time, so I don't know what I'm looking for. And immediately they're recommended to get a gummy, or immediately they're recommended the most popular flower. And some of those, it's not the best recommendation because they're not familiar with what cannabis looks like today. And so just as many people fall into that, we have to have as much THC as possible, that fall into the other bag that says we need to take this a little bit slower. Do you have anything in a 5 milligram? So there has been a really significant shift in that from low dose to high dose. But like Dave said, they make the mints, like the ratio mints, those are low dose, and those are really great for people that microdose. And there's a big demand for that.
Mm-hmm. Suzanne, do you see like the people, because there's a lot of talk about, I guess in recent years, that, trying to move away from just THC and more about terpenes and other cannabinoids? Is that, I mean, there's a lot more talk about it, but when actually people go to the dispensary, is that what we see?
So I wish that my heart could be happy and I would be able to say yes. It happens with every customer. It is getting more prevalent when they're doing bud tender exchanges and recommendations. There's definitely starting to be more conversations about other cannabinoids, CBN and CBG and things of that nature. But you still get those people who, are just, I need whatever's the highest testing. And I think it's a challenge for those of us who represent the industry when we come across those people to, educate them. I have a great analogy that I love to use when it comes to those THC chasers. And it's that, if you're thinking of your body as a car, THC is the gas. It's going to accelerate the experience that you're getting from the cannabis product you selected. But terpenes, cannabinoids, that's the steering wheel. Right. That's what's determining what journey you go on based on that product. And so I really think it's just, if they don't know, they don't know. So it's kind of our job to start offering more of that education.
Yeah, and I think it's a funny thing because it's, I guess with cannabis, there's this approach that sort of will give me the most THC, and that's what works in cannabis. So just give me the one that has the most, and almost a sort of the most I can get for X price and X quantity. And it's just something you don't see with other products really. Like with alcohol, nobody goes into a liquor store and it's like, well, just give me the Everclear, and just
right,
just or 151, and that's it. Because they know that there's more to it. There's, I don't know, the flavor, the sensation. Will it make you feel sick? Will it not? Also, they identify with a certain brand that they think this type of liquor is me or not. And with cannabis, there's more of a tendency to just almost like, look at it like fuel. This has the highest, the most octane.
But I think it's kind of like you said, when you walk into a dispensary and they say, what are you looking for? I think that verbiage needs to kind of shift to what experience are you looking for from what you're purchasing today? Not just, are you here for a vape? Are you here for a gummy? But like, what are you wanting to use this product for? Are you wanting to use it socially? Are you using it to control anxiety? Do you have lower back pain? Like, what is it you want to get from the product?
Mm-hmm. And we find that bud tenders in Missouri, or people who work in the industry, have that sort of like, I don't know about the training, but just sort of the, I guess the training to just sort of like educate people when they come in and they speak to them, just in general. I mean, it's hard to generalize.
I think overall there are a lot of really educated bud tenders in our state. I think it's also kind of, goes back to what you and I talked about before in the blog with it starts at the top. Mm-hmm. So if you're working in a corporation where it's all about transaction times and how fast you're turning and burning those people in the waiting room, it's kind of forcing those frontline bud tenders and patient care associates to stop encouraging the conversation of what they're looking for, because we want them in and out. Let's keep it going, So I think it's just as much the responsibility of the company and the license holder as it is the bud tender.
That makes perfect sense. I think I wanted to get back to there was a point that I wanted to ask you this, Dave. Tammy mentioned how brands can differentiate themselves, like other than just price. But when you all look at creating cannabis products, edibles and other types, how do you, in such a saturated kind of market, what do you think is ways that a company can kind of stand out with what they make?
Well, certainly, as Suzanne kind of mentioned earlier, was experience. And what's that consumer looking for? So are we producing the right products for that experience? Our Good Night gumdrop and vape pens, which have THC, CBD, and CBN in them, are there for folks that are looking to promote relaxation and sleep and those kinds of effects, as well as what are we using in my space? What are we using for ingredients? Are we using the best possible? Are we designing the best experience for these consumers, whether it be taste or package? Well, now that we're limited on our package, that's a whole other story. But we have a great brand team that puts out really good looking products, as nice as any other CPG company in the country for sure. But I think it's all about experience and what that consumer is looking for, and can you tap into that and try to explain to them this is why this may be a little bit more per pouch or per tin or whatever, or jar or whatever it is, why the quality of what we produce is such.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, you know, Proper has done a really good job standing out in the market when you're talking about packaging and the experience. Proper has done a great job of focusing on the sanitation side of how things are packaged as well. So one thing I love about Proper's live rosin vapes, they come with an attached cap. So the mouthpiece that's going to be in my mouth is never uncovered. It's never loose in the bottom of my bag somewhere. I have literally, you know, bought the Proper vapes, used the whole thing, and then moved those caps to another vape just because they do really focus on the food safety side as well, which I think it's important for us to remember. These are consumable products, just like if we were going into a restaurant. So
Absolutely. And that's smart because you know, when you put like a vape in your pocket, by the end of the day, no matter what, you've got all that gunk and all that schmutz inside, and you got to somehow get that out. And it's pretty gross. So why didn't everybody think of the cap? That's actually really smart.
Proper did it right.
I mean, no, it's a great idea. What would you say, Tammy? Is it like kind of also kind of an experience-based sort of thing? When you've got so many people who are making great cannabis products, like how does somebody make theirs stick out, I guess, on the shelf?
I think Dave made a really good point earlier, you know, and it was based on a question that you asked. You know, as we get to be a more mature market, that's when we start to see a lot more product types. So, for example, anyone that knows me will tell you that Ripple is my favorite product of all time, and it's been in the California market for over 10 years. It's a dissolvable THC powder. You know, 1906 in other markets has been very popular, the drop. And those were things, we're just now getting Ripple next week or this week in our market. But the minute 1906 came on scene, when we were still medical, the minute they came on scene, it was hard to keep those in stock. And it's because, like Dave alluded to, in the spaces where there aren't a lot of competitors, especially in different types of products than just the standards, you know, the gummies, the vapes, the flower, the concentrates. It's a lot easier if you're the front runner. It's a lot easier if you're the first one in the market for that kind of product type. So we are starting to see a lot more of that for sure.
That's awesome. I wanted to get back to something you mentioned, Dave. You were talking about packaging, and I thought it'd be interesting to talk about some of the compliance stuff or the regulatory stuff that you had to deal with. Like specifically on the manufacturing side with cannabis, is it really complex in Missouri? I mean, I think it's pretty tough anywhere, but like how stringent or rigid would you say it is there?
Well, we've got a whole new set of rules that have come out this last year, or 9 months or whatever it's been, that'll roll out later this year. And we've been working hard to be compliant there. I think, you know, not having experience in other states, my experience really is just in Missouri. So other than that, it's a consumer out in other states. But I think that the state has done a few things that maybe they didn't need to do in some of this packaging. We had, you know, child resistant packaging. We weren't using animals and people and things like that, and fruit on the cover of packaging, and trying to be as compliant as possible. But, you know, the state has made some changes that we're redesigning all of our packaging now, and as everyone throughout the state is, that at least it's not gotten to the point where it's you know, black and white, and that's the only colors, and no logos or anything like that. At least it allowed for some of that, but they had restricted us a bit as far as what we can do from a, you know, showing the consumer what we do, particularly things like romance copy on the back of the package, which are very prevalent in consumer product goods. that I'm used to in my previous life, where we would describe the product and and talk about it, but we aren't able to do that anymore. But and the other thing is, with packaging, the consumer doesn't, they see it some, but it's not like a row after row of it in a store on the shelf where you really get an impression from it. Here you might see one pouch, or in a display or a tin or a jar, and so you don't get the full impact that you might in regular consumer product goods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not like you would have like on a grocery store shelf or a convenience store, certainly. The same sort of like visual stimulation ability to make that decision. Well, what about in terms of, I guess, like on the work floor in the factory? Was there a whole lot of different when it comes to sanitation, everything else? Are they pretty tough there, relatively speaking?
Yeah, I think for my previous life, it's not like making the chocolates and the gummies that I did before, where we were overseen by the FDA. Here we're overseen by a state agency, that is just different than working under the FDA and the guidelines that were very well established. We have to understand that this is a once in a lifetime, or once in a generation at least, opportunity for a new industry. So we realize the state is still trying to figure some things out as well as we are. But it's different. It's certainly different than in other consumer product goods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And it is, I mean, it's unique and it's going to take some time. Suzanne, you mentioned, I think it kind of ties into what you were saying before about being similar to food products, and the way that people need to look at cannabis. I guess if you could expand on that some, do you think some of these sort of like, there's like HACCP or other tools that people use in food that can apply in cannabis? Do you see people in the industry kind of using these same sort of tools or same sort of methods of training and work like they would in the food industry? Or is it still kind of new?
I think with the state's newest regulation last year that's requiring all license holders to implement a quality management system, we're seeing a little bit more of that shift to the food background. But, like Dave said, we're regulated by the state, DCR or DHSS, as a lot of us know them as. But it's not just those 44 pages for us, because we are producing consumable goods. So we have the 44 pages of DCR regulation, adding to that Missouri Food Code, which is over 130 pages. We also have to be in line with OSHA, which is another 800 pages of standards. So I think since we've went rec, we've seen some really amazing support tools come out for this. Companies like ASI, CSQ, great, support for license holders to ensure that they're meeting all those expectations. They offer a lot of audits and just training and things like that. So I think we're starting to see a heavier shift that direction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I could jump in, Ben, real quick. Here at Proper, we were the first in the state to get the cannabis safety and quality certification. And that was really due to the previous life that I had in food manufacturing, and realizing that whether or not the state was asking for it, we were moving forward with a robust program and wanted a third-party audit and third-party certification to show that we're in line with good food safe manufacturing processes. Lots of details around that, but it really helps to have a standard to work against. And I think we'll see more of that as the market matures. People realize that we are producing ready to consume products and they need to be safe.
Yeah, definitely. That awareness grows as time goes on. It should. Tammy, what would you, if you were advising cannabis companies or people who want to get involved in cannabis in Missouri about some of these issues you got to deal with, like Suzanne and Dave were saying, what are some of the advice you would give? Like, it's gonna be complicated. Make sure to read everything, don't overlook anything, or bring somebody in to help you. What would you say?
I might get major flack about this, and I'm okay with that. But I think one of the most important things that operators can do, whether it's Missouri or any state, is you've got to be able to understand that there are certain things that happen in every market. Every market is very, very different, and the regulations are very different. But if you look at some of the markets that have been legal, or you look at Canada and you look at people, you can start to see the trends that follow. There's always going to be a temporary shortage in supply if you make the leap from medical to rec. There's always going to be changes in regulations that you aren't anticipating. And so to just sort of strike out and take the stance that you're going to do this your way and that you don't care what's ever happened in any other state, I think that you set yourself up for a lot of opportunities to miss the mark and to fail or to have to continue to redo things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Suzanne used the term reinvent the wheel. We do essentially have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to certain things, but it's mostly to meet your particular market. There are a lot of conceptual things that you have to be aware of that exist in this industry, and there's a lot of lessons that you can learn if you're willing to either have someone who knows what's happened in other markets and can kind of help you, you know, navigate that and be willing to accept that there will be some challenges. Or you can go it alone and wind up having to redo things and potentially, you know, hurt your reputation.
Right. So it's not enough to come in and say, hey, I made this work in the restaurant industry or the beverages industry or the CPG somewhere else, and so I know what works and it's going to work there.
Yeah, the reality is it's not Coke and Pepsi.
Right.
And I hear people make that comparison a lot, and I hear people say, this is just like any other business. In some ways, sure, some of the basics, things like cash handling, things like, you know, food safety rules, things like that are very similar to other industries, but just like all the states are set up differently and have different rules and regulations, they have different customers, but you have to be willing to have people help you. It's not just one guy by himself or one woman by herself.
Yeah, definitely. How complicated is that sort of that initial phase for somebody, like the licensing or getting up off the ground, getting all the permits and everything, and then the costs? Is it not for the faint of heart, or is it you know, how would you describe it, I guess?
I think the application portion of it depends a lot on your state and how they choose who is awarded licenses. You know, in a state like Missouri, where we have a limited license program, which, you know, there are a lot of people that are very much against, but when you look at someplace like in Oklahoma, they're a pretty big example of what can go wrong when you have licenses that are extremely easy to acquire. You know, when you're talking about the fee to get a license to operate in Oklahoma being $2,500 versus in a state like Missouri where it's multiple thousands of dollars, but there's a limit versus pulling up to City Hall and honking and waiting for your license to get thrown in the back seat. There's a huge difference in the amount of effort that it takes and the amount of money that it takes to be able to be successful in just the license acquisition itself. And that's not even taking into account choosing a location for your business where the zoning requirements meet the regulations from the state or the governing body. It can be very complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, is there a pretty robust social equity applicants program in place? Are they doing a lot with that, like in other states, or?
So we actually have a micro business component to our recreational Amendment 3 that passed, and those are based on social equity criteria.
Okay, nice. Well, this is another aspect. This is probably pretty far down the road in a lot of legal states. There's only a couple have really made it work at all. But what about, could it ever be sort of a Missouri kind of like have a tourism component, maybe like consumption lounges, or is that kind of we're you know, one thing at a time? Is that what you're thinking? Suzanne, what do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that we have tried to create some of those spaces already. Recently, with DCR's rollout of their investigative branch, I have seen a lot of communication in the network and in the industry that a lot of those events and types of gatherings are being kind of regulated more now than they were in the past. I do think it's something that could definitely be on the horizon. I think it's something that we should look at. If I can go to a bar and have shots and drink Bud Light, I should be able to go to a comedy show and hit my vape, you know?
Yeah. I mean, you could discreetly, but you mean legal. Yeah, certainly.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, logically, it makes perfect sense, obviously. But, you know, that, I guess, you know, one thing at a time. The fact that there's,
Yes.
you know, it's easy to take for granted just the fact that there's legal cannabis retail shops, which is already pretty amazing.
Awesome. Yeah. And there are areas, you know, where you can consume and a lot more freely, and it's not as regulated. Missouri's not there yet. That'll come in time.
What about like cross-border? Because there's so many states bordering Missouri, and I think, let's see, Iowa doesn't have legal reg. Kansas, Arkansas, Tennessee. I think nobody except for Illinois, pretty much. I think. Are people coming across border and going to? Is it seeing a lot of that with the state? Yeah.
Absolutely. You can see that a lot in like the Kansas City market in Missouri, for example. That's a more saturated area of the state when it comes to licenses. And I think that's a lot to do with the pull from across the border. Same with Illinois. Illinois is a legal market, but tax rates and things of that nature, regulations around what you can purchase as a recreational consumer over there still send people across the border to our state. You know, I think that's one thing Missouri has done a lot differently than some of these other more mature markets. Is Missouri is still a market where whether you're a patient or a consumer, you can still purchase the high dose edibles. There's no stipulation to what percentage of THC products you're allowed to buy and things like that.
So even if you are in a legal state, in this case, Illinois, you might prefer, if you're close enough to the border, just to duck over to the show me state, where they can show you cheaper prices, potentially.
Yes.
And I just noticed there's somebody here from Green Frame. Great point, Suzanne. The proper caps are brilliant. So the word is out about the proper caps, which is great. It reminds me of like, this is so different, but with gas caps on cars, forever you'd have to put it on top of your car and then you drive off. And then some company thought of, why don't you just have the thing that attaches it to it?
Yes.
And then everybody had it. It just makes so much perfect sense. And I think something like, like the cap seems like a similar thing. Like, why everybody's got junk in their pockets. So why not? So I guess, before we get out of here today, I know we hit upon this somewhat before, but I'm just curious to ask you all what advice you would give to anybody who would want to get into the cannabis business in Missouri. I know it's a pretty big one, and it's like, where would you start? But Tammy, you want to take a swing at that one?
I would say understand what you're planning to do before you decide that you're doing it. I think that a lot of people are misinformed or don't know all of the things and all of the hoops that you have to jump through in order to be a cannabis business anywhere, but especially in specific states. I actually had a patient, this was like 2 years ago when we had first launched medical. I had a patient walk into a dispensary that I was standing in at the time, and he said, my wife and I are getting ready to start the dispensary. And I said, oh gosh, what group are you a part of? What license are you a part of? And he goes, what do you mean? And I said, what license group are you a part of? Because I know most of the operators in Missouri. And he was like, oh, we haven't decided what we're doing yet. And it was one of those moments where your head just wants to explode. Because there's no way on earth that this person is going to get a license at that time. All of the licenses were handed out. The market was already up and running. And so for just a random person to think that he and his wife could just go fill out some paperwork and start a business, it was a stark reminder of all of the things that people don't know about starting a cannabis business anywhere.
Yeah, people have the perception that I think it's a lot easier than it is, and I think partly it's because it's cannabis. People, there's sort of this perception that, oh, it's it's weed. How hard can it be? And it sells itself, which in theory is true, but that's certainly not simple. Suzanne, what would you tell somebody?
I think, for me, it's not as specific to this industry. Mentorship was really key for me. Getting out to events within the industry that were open to the public, meeting people who were in the industry, getting to ask those questions to them. And then also, cannabis is ever changing. So if you're not willing to invest in your own education to be successful in the industry, you're not going to make it.
So always be growing and learning more.
Yes.
That's smart.
Open to change.
Yeah, it definitely applies in other industries, but I would think more so in one that's still relatively so new, like cannabis, and so dynamic. I guess dynamic's an easy way to call it. So many things change and it moves so fast. What about you, Dave? What do you think?
I think realizing that you're going to need a lot more resources than you might have originally thought. You need help in finance. You need help in operations. You're going to need help in cultivation, whatever license you're going for. You're going to need a lot of resources, and realize that, of course, is going to cost money, and you need to make sure you got fairly deep pockets to get. To start any business takes money, but I think in this space, it takes considerable amount.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and arguably that's putting it lightly. Definitely need money, and probably more than you might have thought. Well, this has been great. I really appreciate you guys sharing all these insights about Missouri with everybody here. If anybody watching wants to see more or hear more from our guests and where they work at, you can check them all out here. So there's Proper Brands, Proper Cannabis, there's XL Cannabis Services, and TPP Services LLC. So definitely go check them out, and we'll post all that online. And if you'd like to see more about what we're doing at Rootwurks, so we provide training and education solutions to cannabis, as well as compliance management tools. And our founders come from the food industry, so they have a lot of decades of experience in the food industry and dealing with food standards. And so much like we were talking about earlier in this webinar about these things that apply to both industries, that's definitely right down our alley. So check that out. And also our HACCP course, which is now live and there to be ordered. And anything else, just reach out to us. So thank you all for being here with us today. And good luck to everybody in Missouri.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Definitely. Thanks for being here, guys.